Hello and welcome to The People I Know, a philosophical podcast with and about the diverse people I have met over the years as an African American philosopher, dancer, academic, all kinds of titles. Today's guest is Ken Feinstein, realtor by day, Shakespeare authorship scholar, linguist, and philosopher by night. I hope you enjoy the episode.
I'm Ken Feinstein. We met in philosophy class.
Yeah,
I would,
doing our. Well, I was
explain how
doing
we
my
met.
master's. You were doing your
You were doing
master's
your
as well.
master's. I was doing my master's, and we met in philosophy class, probably in Hume class. I don't know. And
Yeah.
and we used to hang out in the that room, that TA room. You were
Oh
the
yeah.
head TA, right? You were my
I
boss,
was.
I guess, on
I
some level.
was. Oh
That's
right.
right.
That's
Yeah, you were my
right.
boss. So say
Supervise some
you were my
classes.
supervisor.
Make
And
sure
then
you're teaching
one
things.
time I filled in for you.
Oh goodness.
That was fun.
um. So we can dive in. Um. And my first formal question is, how do you use philosophy today? Either
Okay.
professionally or not professionally, or just on a regular basis.
I mean, should I talk about the Shakespeare stuff
Yeah,
or not?
however you do. I mean, how so you have multiple degrees. I was doing a little research on you, and there's a lot in
Right.
your brain that I never knew about. So as far as philosophy specifically, or anything that you would classify as being philosophical, how do you use that in your everyday life?
For me, philosophy, well, is not. I never looked at it as something useful as much as I had these questions and I had to figure out what to do with them. Right.
Mm,
So philosophy is sort of a way to sort of grapple with my own issues or grapple with my own questions or sort of make sense of them in a way that I can cope with them. It's more like a coping mechanism for me because you have all these questions. And part of it is because we sort of have philosophy in the background, right? So everywhere in the world, everyone's either heard a little philosophy or read a little bit or read something that's influenced by philosophy. But until you study in depth, you don't know what people are really talking about. You don't know what the basis of those arguments are.
mm,
So people like, what's the right thing to do? What should I do in this situation? And sort of people have these half digested philosophical answers. And until you study philosophy in depth, you can't understand what are the real issues. And so for me, that's what was philosophy was, something that drove me to it is I didn't want to be confronted with these questions and not have the whole story. I
mm,
don't think philosophy gives answers. I don't think
mm-mm.
there's any answers at all for anything, right? It's just like,
Mm-hmm.
and it's disappointing, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's been the main thing about my study in school is that I'm always disappointed, right? So
Yeah.
I start in undergrad, I studied linguistics. And I
Mm,
thought, oh, I was a kid, right? I thought, oh, I'm going to study this, you know, Chomsky's generative grammar and all these fabulous theories, and they're going to give me deep insights into language. And then I started studying this stuff. I'm like, you people don't know anything. They know certain things, like
yeah.
right. There's certain like how language develops over time, historical linguistics. They're very clever. It works.
Mm-hmm.
They really understand certain things. But
Right.
there's and sort of how sounds are made, stuff they can describe it, but their deep theory, their deep it means nothing, right?
Mm,
And they argue about it with no. It's like philosophy. They argue about it with each other, go round and round in circles, and have no resolution to it. So
mm-hmm.
philosophy is similar. We go round and round and round and get no solution to anything. But if you don't go round and round and round, you don't even understand the problem, right? And
Right.
that's the same thing with linguistics. Is so if you need to understand about language, and you can come with silly theories that you want to bludgeon other people over the head with, but your silly theory doesn't really account for it or explain it. It's just another way of looking at it. And I look at philosophy the same way, is that you get these different ways of looking at a problem or an issue. And once you know the main ways of looking at something, at least you understand the issue better. You don't get a solution to it,
Mm-hmm.
but you gotta solve it. Sometimes because you have to act in life, right? You have to do
Mm-hmm.
things.
Right.
But so you have to do something, right? but it's not like there's some grand theory that's going to tell you what to do, because they don't work that way. And
Yeah.
so, but which makes it seem like philosophy is the stupidest thing in the world to study. But for me, it was like, wow, I'm so happy I'm doing this. I
Uh-huh.
really understand these things so much better. The things that I was a little bit worried about, or had questions about, and after studying it and studying, taking classes and going to some things in depth, I felt so much better,
Mm.
because I, not that I had solutions, but I, at least I knew I wasn't conflicted inside about what the issues were. I knew what the issues were, and I could sort of make peace with whatever those are in a way that worked for me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I like philosophy. That's why I loved philosophy. And we were in school together, and that's why I enjoyed it so much.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to meeting fun people like you, right? But the just the opportunity to resolve some of these issues in my own mind.
Yeah.
Um, it's like ethics, right? For me, what am I supposed to do? What decisions am I supposed to make? What is society supposed to do?
Mm-hmm.
These ethicists pretend like they have some kind of system or theory that'll instruct you what to do. You follow their rubrics, and at the end, you're going to find out what you're supposed to do. What you learn when you study these things in depth is that none of this stuff works. It's not based on anything. It's all just people spinning around in circles. But spinning around in circles, you learn a lot, right? Because
Yeah.
when you spin around in circles, you see things from every perspective, right? So it's good to spin around in a circle. You don't end up anywhere but where you started, but at least you understand where you've been. So for me, that's what the value of philosophy to me, the main value of philosophy has been for me, I think.
Yeah. That's an interesting point that keeps coming up as I speak, philosophically with folks, and in some ways it's very obvious, but in other ways, especially now that we are so many years away from our formal studying of these theories and these philosophers and whatever it was that we thought that we were going to do with philosophy, that you know, I was very similar to you. That's why I fell in love with philosophy. That's why I went ahead and decided to go to school for it. Was because I'm like, oh, I enjoy this spinning around in circle, at least in circles with some kind of parameters and guidance. Like, I'm not just wondering why I have this strange feeling in my gut or in my mind. Now I can label it as, oh, that's my existential dread. Oh, that's
Right,
me
right,
wondering what ethics, what's right and what's wrong. Oh, that's
right.
something
Exactly.
metaphysical.
So
At
were
least I
you
can put
teaching?
labels on it.
Were you teaching, actually teaching philosophy? You've been
Mm-hmm.
teaching it some, right?
Yeah. When I was down in South Florida, so after grad school, I taught at Diablo Valley College
Oh, right.
for a semester, and then I decided to leave California, so I went down to South Florida, and that's where I was teaching in two community colleges for
Do you
for
do you
a
think
while.
it helped those students? Do you think it was useful to them, or do you think it was just meeting some requirement for school? Be honest, because I'm curious. We have a lot of friends who taught.
Excuse me.
A lot of our people in our program went on to these, to teach it.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm always curious if they really think they're making an impact in helping
Mm-hmm.
people, or if it's really just like almost like being a counselor to them, and the philosophy is just sort of
Right.
secondary to being nice to people. You know what I mean?
Right. So when I was doing the student teaching at San Francisco State, that's when, so I'd wanted to be a teacher like since always. I wanted to be a
Right.
dancer, a rock star, and a teacher.
Right.
So that, like, since I was a kid, that's just what I wanted. And so when I was doing the student teaching at SF State, I realized that I still liked it. It was still cool. I liked
Right.
seeing those light bulbs come on in the classroom. I was fine with teaching this like introductory level philosophical stuff. I wasn't trying to teach like high level Descartes or Hume or Nietzsche or none of that. I didn't want to
Right.
touch
Right.
it. Like, I left that to you all who could, like, that just wasn't my passion. So when I finally got into doing it independently with, I was out on my own doing it. There were definitely the specific students, particularly in the philosophy classes, that they were just trying to figure out enough to pass.
Right.
And I was trying to teach things in a way so that they could pass, or so that they
Right.
could not feel like I'm trying to get them to do philosophy. I mean, these are people in a career college, like they just needed this course. But At some point, definitely in critical thinking, definitely in ethics, less so in philosophy. But at some point, we came across some lesson where it would click that this was something relevant to life.
Right.
Whether it was because they were going to be nursing students and they just needed to understand that people have different perspectives, people come from different backgrounds, and they had to like recognize that as relevant, or, or if it was something greater, like, okay, once you have children, then life changes for X and Y reasons. Something about philosophy did open up minds, or at least like cause a crack um, at some point.
Yeah. I mean,
Um, yeah.
I taught, well, we were in the program together, and as your, listeners and viewers should know, you were my boss for a little while because you were the graduate student supervisor, I
Uh-huh.
guess, of all of us. So you were
Yes.
my boss for a little while, and I taught for 2 semesters,
Hmm.
and I don't know if I taught anybody any philosophy at all, but what I did do, I sort of almost viewed it as like a practical course in like essay writing, and I
Okay.
tried to make it very practical. So I, taught essay structure and had them write essays, and so for me, I sort of felt like I introduced some philosophical concepts, like we did the arguments for the existence of God and stuff like that, which is fun and crazy. And I think like one student was interested in it, and that was great.
Hmm.
And I hopefully they were enthused by it. But
Uh-huh.
I sort of felt like, what can I give them that's something that's sort of practical to take away from this?
Yeah.
My charming face and my little jokes are, I aren't going to get them very far. So I thought, well, maybe
Yeah.
if I can help them write an argumentative essay in a
Yeah.
way that makes sense and has structure and this kind of thing
Hmm.
might be helpful. So that's sort of the tack I took. But it was a required course, right? And so I knew nobody wanted to be there,
Hmm.
right? And so it was a
Yeah.
weird experience. You try to entertain them if you could and
Yeah.
make it tolerable for them. But half of them
Yeah.
didn't even want to be in college, right?
Right.
Right. I mean, it's like I should be doing something else. Why am I here? My mom made they would tell me this. My mom said I had to go to college, so I'm here. How are you doing?
Oh gosh.
It's like, okay, well,
Yeah.
I'm here too. I'm not sure why I'm here. So we're in the same boat. Why am I looking at you, listening to myself talk? But
Yeah.
it's
But
that feeling, right?
yeah. But going that argumentative route, it definitely, it's one of, where do I start this thought? So these interviews, these conversations are part of part of a larger project that I'm working on, which is Make America Think Again. And
Okay.
I'm doing some short videos. They're very quick lessons, quick critical thinking lessons for the average American, and then these conversations that are casual but also somewhat in depth, just about how we use philosophy as regular people, as much as regular as philosophers can be. And so to go, when you say that you went that route of like teaching people how to write an argumentative essay, that's something that I touch on with this critical thinking stuff, is just part of the reason that we keep missing each other socially and culturally is that we don't know how to freaking argue. I mean, we know how to like, I'm going to punch you with my words
Right.
or
Right.
actually punch you, but we don't know how to like listen, chew on what the person has said, come back with some kind of response to what they have said, like
Right. Right.
support what we're saying with
Well, that
all
was
those
the
things.
just to touch on that. That was one of the hardest things my students had is, I required 3 affirmative arguments and you deal with 2 counter arguments. So I'm saying,
Yeah.
you've got to figure out what's your smartest opponent, not your weakest one. What's your
Right.
smartest opponent going to say to you, and how are you
Yeah.
going to counter that?
Yeah.
And it's challenging for them because they can't think of another way. So how could anybody not think about it this way, right? So it's like
Right.
I'm right, so there's no other argument. My 3 are perfect. There's no other way to look at it. And like you were saying, I think that forcing people to look at things from all sides is helpful, even if they don't change their opinion.
Right.
At least they have a different perspective, or they've allowed themselves to look at it from a different perspective, and
Yeah.
at least maybe they'll have a little sympathy for someone with a different view. or
something,
empathy or something, right?
something more than apathy. Just,
Right. A little bit engaged,
just a little bit
but
engaged.
I'm not I'm not a rationalist type, right? So I
Hmm.
don't really believe that arguments, people don't believe things for rational reasons. They believe things because they believe them, and an argument might help them change their view or give them a different perspective, but it's not going to like, oh, that was so convincing, I've changed my view. That almost never happens, right? So
When you put it that way, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
yeah, so that's how I look at it. So by, you know, making people think about things is useful for them,
Mhm. Mhm.
and maybe it makes them a little softer in their anger, and maybe it opens them up to possibly changing their view in the future.
Mhm.
But you're never going to bludgeon someone over the head with arguments. Almost
Mhm.
nobody changes their mind that way,
Mhm.
in my view. And Hume,
Mhm.
Hume used to say that too, right? You
Mhm.
know, that people just, beliefs are, what's the more vivid idea in your head, not
Mm.
what rationalism, some rational thought process deduction has produced.
Mhm.
And you know I'm involved, like I've said, we've talked about it before. I've been involved in this Shakespeare authorship research. Okay.
Mhm.
And this is the way in my life that sort of philosophy showed me what's going on. It gave me a perspective to understand, I think, understand what's going on in ways that other people couldn't understand. Because I studied at, in a master's program, I studied mostly Hume, Kant, and philosophy of science. And when you study philosophy of science, you read Kuhn, you read these other philosophers, and you learn about how scientific theories develop and change,
Mm.
how, and it's another issue of perspective, right? I mean, they call it a
Mhm.
paradigm. Kuhn calls it a paradigm shift, but it's really just looking at the same data, the same information from a different perspective, and that giving you a better handle on it, right? So
Mhm.
you look at the famous example is, you look at the motion of the planets, and then you think about what's going on. And Copernicus said, well, maybe the sun's in the center. And you're seeing the same data, you're seeing the same movement of the
Right.
planets, you're just looking at it from a different perspective. And does that new perspective help you or hurt you in understanding what's going on, right?
Mhm.
And so when I looked into this Shakespeare authorship question, who wrote the works of Shakespeare, this has
Mhm.
been a debate going on for 150 years at least. And so I started looking into it. And what was clear to me is that the philosophy of science told me what was going on here. Because Kuhn had the deep insight that a good theory is producing good research
Mm.
based on that theory. It's sort of creating a research program. And if
Okay.
Shakespeare wrote the works of Shakespeare, if that was a good theory, then when people study Shakespeare's life,
Mhm.
and they studied the works, they would reinforce each other. The more you
Mhm.
studied his life, the more you'd understand the works based upon that study,
Mhm.
if it was a correct theory.
Hmm.
But that hasn't been happening. In the last 100 years, studying Shakespeare's life doesn't produce anything in understanding the works. In fact, they don't even have a really theory or a clear narrative of how Shakespeare's life aligns with the the composition of these works. Right? He was
Okay.
involved in acting them. He was involved in the uh, part owner in the acting company that produced them, but actually composing them, there's
Mhm.
nothing that aligns. Right?
Mhm.
So you
That's a
have
really interesting way to get at that. I mean, I've
right,
not heard it said this way. And when I was talking to someone about you and your and that Shakespeare, I should say, in my head, it's anti-Shakespeare work.
right,
Um, they were saying that, yeah, this isn't anything new. This is something that people have been bringing up and studying, researching for quite a while. But I think that that is quite a clear way of why it's something to question, and that we can apply that to all kinds of other things, that if that they should align. if we have this theory about Shakespeare or anything else, and then we look at Shakespeare or anything else, it should reinforce the theory, but or support it in some kind of way. And if it doesn't, then
Well, then we need to
let the
look for
questions begin.
right, and we need to look for alternatives that might.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is, and this is where the philosophy also is helpful, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the research done against Shakespeare, if we want to phrase it that way, has been really, really bad. So the
Okay.
anti-Shakespeare people
Uh-huh.
are worse than the Shakespeare people. So you have what I like to call a circular firing squad of wrong,
Oh
where
gosh.
the Shakespeare scholars are saying something that's probably not correct. And then the anti-Shakespeare people are coming up with theories that are even worse. So they're fighting with each other where they're both wrong.
Oh.
And one is more wrong than the other, kind of. I mean, it's like which part of wrong is less wrong, right?
Yeah.
So you've got this just mess of people fighting with each other about something where they're both just going at it the wrong way, and they can't see it because they're so angry at the other guy that they can't see what they're doing is completely the wrong direction. And there's nobody to come and step in and say, okay, let's stop for a second and see what's really going on here, and let's try to be, I hate to say rational about it, but at least methodical about it, okay, and try to figure out how to handle this. But everybody also has their own self-interest and their own ego involved too, right?
Right.
And on top of that, they have their feeling like my view is somehow righteous.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Shakespeare came from nothing and wrote plays, and how dare you suggest that somebody else did it? You're a classist monster. Is the normal critique. You're a
Gracious.
classist Oh, I can't tell you what goes on. You know,
Well,
my
I looked
father.
at the comments on your fallacy YouTube video.
Right.
YouTube fallacy video. Like, wow, this is getting heated. I didn't realize.
Oh, that's nothing. That's nothing. That is such low key stuff compared to what goes on with this.
Wow.
I don't engage. I don't know if you saw my replies. I don't engage with people. In the beginning, I did. In the beginning of this, I went onto this Facebook group. Okay, this was in the very beginning of my research. And I'm old fashioned. I don't believe this, but like you're saying, argument will answer it. So if I go into this group of people and I present some ideas and listen to their response, I'm going to get a better idea of what's going on. I went into this group. I had just every post I would make, I would have 3 or 4 responses within 5 or 10 seconds attacking.
Oh gosh.
Okay. And there would be threads upon threads and deep threads and rabbit holes. And it was like this incredible conflagration, because these people didn't have people to fight with, right? Because nobody would go on their group to fight with them, and they wanted to fight. They wanted to argue. And I was naive. I thought that they cared about the answer. But I also wanted to test. Are these people would spend a lot of time on this, years on it. They're amateurs, but they're the amateur experts. Okay, so
expert amateurs.
Exactly. So something like this. I mean, the whole thing's such a mess. I can't tell you, because how people use authority on this game too. But these people were very serious about this, and I thought, well, they must have good answers. They must have good. I didn't think that. I thought maybe they might. Turned out they didn't. Turned out they didn't have good arguments. They didn't have good answers. They had a lot of bullying, a lot of nastiness. They repeated the same things over and over again. And they didn't really have an insight or an explanation to any serious critique. They just had the same apologetics. And that's why I call it apologetics, because it's really religious. It's really religious defense of religion rather than defense of history or the study of, sort of a scientific inquiry. It's religious for them. And once I saw what was going on there, that these people didn't really have good arguments, then I knew, okay, it's not like I'm completely off base here. Now my work begins. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
thing that people don't understand. They take a religious view about this. It's not a religious question, it's a factual question. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do real research, and I'm going to do real research that anybody would classify as real research, and we'll see what happens, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, they want to stop the research. They want to say that this isn't even a question, you're not allowed to research it.
Mm-hmm.
And traditional scholars are not permitted to study this topic. They're not permitted to even discuss this topic. Literally,
Mm-hmm.
it would be professional suicide to even mention this topic. If you're a professor of Shakespeare studies or a graduate student, you
Mm-hmm.
cannot even voice any anything doubting Shakespeare at all. It's completely forbidden. So it has to be outsiders like me. It has to be amateurs doing the research because the people in academia won't touch it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but it's not a religion for me, right?
Right. There's some interesting parallels, if I might interrupt you, that are like popping up in my head, and this is it's epiphanies are happening right now. That, I mean, first of all, with specifically with your research, this is really interesting. And I'm glad that some gear is turning, even if it's turning slowly. But then I think what you're saying, if you weren't even speaking about Shakespeare, you can apply it to so many things. Of course, obviously, right now I'm thinking about how I live in, the desert, the sticks of Arizona. And
Right.
whenever I go into town, the people I encounter are very single-minded, and don't want to hear criticisms because they've been entrenched in certain ways for so long, and even and their beliefs are so religious,
Right.
literally like dealing with God, but in this kind of unquestioned devotional type way. And it's very dangerous, whether you're talking about Shakespeare or American politics or a personal health and wellness. If we are so devoted to a way that we think and believe is right, that we can't criticize that we can't be critical of that way, then we might be stuck doing the wrong things for a very long time.
Yes, and you have to give people some. You have to um, realize that they're under huge social pressure, right? So
Yeah,
there's a huge social pressure to conform.
yeah.
If everybody you know in your neighborhood has a certain view,
Mm-hmm.
can you step outside that, even
Right.
privately? And what are the consequences for this?
What are
And
the consequences for that?
right, and this happens. I mean, uh, in people with strong religious backgrounds,
Mm-hmm.
it's the same thing. If you're brought up in a certain religious faith and you want to exit that faith or take a slightly different view of that, what are the consequences? And maybe you're
Right.
married to somebody based on that faith, and that's a core of your relationship.
Right.
If you have a change of view, or you have children, or whatever it is, what are the
Mm-hmm.
consequences?
They're very
And
real consequences. I mean,
right,
talking about financial support, emotional support, just social, knowing who we are, being confidence. I mean, go to Maslow's hierarchy, and that bottom level might drop out,
right.
um,
And
depending on
it's the same
what it
thing for the
is.
Shakespeare stuff. It's bizarre, but it's true. So let's
Mm-hmm.
say you're a rising graduate student studying Shakespeare. And
Mm-hmm.
in your careful research, you've determined that you think that Shakespeare didn't write Shakespeare. You think somebody else. That's what you study the Italian sources of Shakespeare, and you say, well, the author must have been able to read Italian, and you just affirm on this because these 20 reasons the author must have been able to read Italian, and there's no evidence that Shakespeare could read Italian, so maybe somebody, and that's your view, maybe
Mm-hmm.
somebody else read it. Your career is over if you voice that view.
Mm.
And it's a silly thing. Who cares? I mean, I think it's a silly thing who wrote the works of Shakespeare. What does it matter, right?
Right.
But you know, if you think people are faced with these kinds of problems in their real life, in things, religion or politics, or their own view of themselves or their own
Mm-hmm.
identity,
Yeah.
and they need to squash it, push it down.
Yeah.
It's like the Book of Mormon musical, push it down, right? You got to push it down, whatever it is. Better hide that,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, how, can you keep it down long enough? Can you
Right.
keep it down, right? And people are faced with these things every day,
Yeah.
and if people were more open to open inquiry and discussion, it might be better. But I
Yeah.
don't think that's it. I mean, it would be better. I don't. I mean, you're a little more
It'd be
optimistic, I think, than
better.
me. It'd be
I
better,
I
but I don't. I don't.
will.
I'm not the optimist. I mean, you walking into this town, you're brave. I honor you, but you know,
Yeah.
I don't. I live in an area where people look just. My wife is. Frankly, my wife is Chinese. My kids are half Asian, and I live in a
Mm-hmm.
community where that's like the norm.
Mm.
So I mean, I, I've picked the place to live where we fit right
Mm-hmm.
in. Nobody thinks
Mm-hmm.
twice, and
Right.
there are
And that's
places where I could live where people would like what.
exactly.
And I live in the Bay Area. I mean, I live where this is.
That's the norm.
We're living in the norm, right? So I mean, everybody, you're braver than me. You're a risk taker in a way that I'm not, and that's what I really.
I
That's the only thing I really want to talk about today. Is your risk taking and your
oh
bravery,
gosh.
and what that says about you and what you think about life. That's what really I care about, not the rest of this.
Well, I tell you what, we've covered, definitely covered, critical thinking and applying philosophy to everyday
Right.
life. There's been so much there already, and whether however the hell you feel about it, I think it's important, and I appreciate what you've
Do you
said.
want to talk about kids?
Um, yeah. Well, so the last question that I ask folks is about existential dilemmas. So if you
Existential dilemmas.
yeah, what's your relationship with existential dilemmas? Um, yeah, so if you can just speak a bit on how, as a philosopher, let me ask this question as big as I can. How has raising kids been for you as a philosopher, as a thinker?
Well, I will tell you that it was very clear to me very early on that philosophy has no way of even slightly dealing with the issue of children and one's own children. So it's completely disconnected from the reality of everybody's life. Not everyone's, but most people have children, right?
Yeah,
Either
yeah.
they have their own, or they end up with somebody who has kids, or
Hmm.
they're very have close relationship with their nieces and nephews, right?
Hmm.
Whatever it is, step grandkids, whatever it is. Almost all people have some very close relationship with some child at some point.
Hmm.
And there's no ethics about that.
There's no traditional ethics, traditional philosophy.
Can't
For
cope
a
with it.
long time,
Look
philosophers
look at the
didn't.
trolley problem, right? Should I kill 3 or should I kill 1? Okay, should I kill 15 or should I kill my own niece?
Yeah,
You're going to kill the 15. You're going
right.
to flip the switch. And there's no ethics that's going to make you do differently.
Hmm.
Okay? What would you do to save your own child? What would you do? You save your own nephew, right? What would you do? And
Right.
how
We
does
get
that
these.
align with it?
Yeah.
Right? You would do anything or almost anything. Maybe you wouldn't harm somebody, like seriously harm somebody, but anything less, you'd probably do it, right?
Mm.
And would you feel bad about it? Maybe you feel bad about it, but you do it anyway. And
Mm.
how does philosophy tell you how to handle that, right?
Hmm.
They talk about utilitarianism, the greatest good for the greatest number, whatever.
Hmm.
So that doesn't apply 1 second once you have your own kid. Your only value in your own, the truth of the matter is the only really thing I value in my life is my own children and what I
Mm,
would do for them. Nothing else matters. I don't care about any of this stuff. So whatever's going on, I think about was it good for my kids, right?
mhm,
Nothing else. I don't really care about anything else because nothing else really matters to me. And there's no philosophy or ethics that can trump that fact.
mhm,
And religion is the same thing. It amazes me. I mean, I'm going to be a little critical of religion.
mhm,
It amazes me that people are so concerned with their own salvation or their own sort of relationship with God. But I think a lot of religion isn't actually based on that. A lot of people's religious belief isn't focused on their own connection with God.
mm,
It's more like my children's future salvation or my children's future, whatever future it is. How can I assure that? And people aren't
mm,
concerned about themselves in many ways, a lot
mm,
of people. And so, religion, ethics, everything, it's always focused on the philosophers are focusing on me and my head and
mhm,
people in general. And they never deal with the real issue is your own family, your own children, and it could be your own parents, right?
mhm,
And, the relationship goes both ways.
mhm,
And sort of the family as the center of everything, the family as the only ethics that really matters to people,
mhm.
a real ethics that actually looks at how people actually live should start there, and none of it
Mhm.
does, right? That's the
Right.
main
That's when
thing
we're
I
talking about
learned.
sociology, or
Right, right,
it turns into some other technical field of study.
right. But it shouldn't. It
Right.
shouldn't. Philosophy needs to deal with this and needs to deal
Hmm.
with it directly if they're going to pretend to tell people what to do.
Hmm.
I think it's ridiculous.
I mean, I
Philosophers.
want to speak for the people who I hear listening to this in the future who are screaming, well, that's what feminist philosophies came along and did. That's what care ethics is. That's what who all these other
Yes, yes.
philosophers are. But yeah, absolutely. If
I mean,
we don't start in these
right.
places when we're
Some
studying philosophy.
philosophy does deal with it.
Mhm.
But a lot of this stuff is also social. It's like,
Right.
I mean, I haven't studied feminist philosophy in detail, but if a lot of it says, women as a group or, you know, sort of the struggles between men and women or whatever it is.
Mm.
Is it really focused on individual people and their own family relationships and how that's the central to their ethical life? If it is, I need to read this stuff, but
Yeah, it's definitely shifting the focus
shifting the
of
focus there.
where we even start all of this questioning. Basically
Right, right,
doing, what you're saying we should do. Yes, if I am a single male uh, person who is well off enough to like go off into the woods and live in a house by
right,
myself, or if I'm a
right.
single female, without kids,
Exactly.
go and
I
live in
mean,
the desert. Sure,
I
these are
mean,
going to be my concerns. I get to get introspective. I get to go inside for a few months.
right,
But
right,
if I have two children and I am living paycheck to paycheck and I still have very big existential questions, they are going to sound and look different than those single people.
right.
And so, yeah, those other philosophies are saying we can still ask these questions, but we're going to frame them quite a bit differently. What is my life? What is my children's life going to look like? What is my family life going to look like? How can I access my needs and provide for them or us? Us.
Right.
Really.
Exactly. It's
Things turned
us.
into us.
It's all, but for most people, it's us.
Mm-hmm,
Almost,
mm-hmm.
there's almost always an us. There,
Yeah.
you know, and people just downplay that. And part of it is
Yeah.
some of the religious traditions sort of extricate the philosophers from their families,
Mm-hmm.
monastic traditions and whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
you can't separate people from that. You can't even, the idea of this individualism idea that people have, and the guy's wandering around by himself in the state of nature and chooses some land and decides to build it. That never happened in human history. People were always connected to their families. That's
Mm-hmm.
how people have always been, and that's how
Mm-hmm.
people think and act, and that's what they really care about. And
Yeah.
if you're studying an ethics that isn't connected to what people really care about make decisions about. It's not human ethics, it's something else, right?
Yeah.
It's robot ethics or something. But we're not robots, we're people, and people
Yeah.
are, almost everybody's involved in some kind of very close family relationship that overrides everything for them.
Mhm. Yeah.
Most people. So
Yeah.
that's what having kids made for me, is that I would look at some of this stuff and I'm like, you're missing the point here.
Mm.
It's like Kant and his, never lie. You never
Mhm.
lie you know, because if people lie, it'd be bad. Okay, well, I agree. It's better to be honest, but they're coming to kill my kid and I've hidden him under the floorboards. Is your kid there? Okay, I'm not going to say yes,
Right. Yeah,
you know,
that's a
but
tough one to,
right?
to to
I'm
try
not
and teach and impart, because those very real circumstances
right,
come up, and it's hard to refute reality with theory, with
right.
fantasy.
And
I mean, there's really no point.
right, but even if Kant would say, well, you should sacrifice your life. Fine, I'll
Mm-hmm.
sacrifice my life for the principle of being honest and count
Mm-hmm.
on that God's going to help me in the end or something. I'm not going to
Mm-hmm.
sacrifice my kid's life,
Mm-hmm.
right? So even if you say that you should do it, fine. I should donate my left kidney to a stranger because ethically that's good or something. Well, I'm
Mm-hmm.
not going to donate my kid's left kidney. I'm right, right. I'm
Yeah.
not going to do that, right? So,
Right.
I can make choices for myself. Well, I want to give one example, and I thought it was
Mhm.
very funny to me, and
Okay.
and I don't want to say who, but I had it because it's a little. I don't want to say who.
Okay.
So this professor, who's an excellent philosophy professor,
Mhm.
he said to the class, he liked virtue ethics,
Okay.
and he said, "Well, I read this story, and this guy ran into a burning building to save a child, and he didn't even think twice about it. He just did it selflessly
Mm.
to try to save this child, and that's the kind of virtue that I aspire to. I hope someday I can be that selfless and
Mm.
that willing to sacrifice myself, like this hero who went in to save the child.
Mhm.
I didn't say this in class because I didn't want to make a fight,
Mhm.
but what I was thinking was, well, that's not how life works, because I got two little kids at home,
Mhm.
okay? And I don't know what the probability is that I'm going to be able to save somebody if I run into that house, but I've got a duty to my kids, and I'm not going to risk my life that way. I'm
Mm.
not going to do that because I've got to come home to my kids. And if I don't come home to my kids,
Mhm.
then they're going to suffer the rest of their lives, right? So
Mhm.
my duty to my kids is more important to this than my duty to this stranger. And I'm not sure if I can save them anyway.
Mhm.
And so unless you're working that type of ethics into your ethical system,
Mhm.
your obligation to the people that matter to you, because that is the essence of your ethical, that is what guides people ethically.
Can I let me ask you something, because that brings up a question in my mind, because I'm thinking, yes, this sounds nice and dandy. It sounds like you would attempt that if possible for your own children, but not for some strangers' children. But do you think perhaps that really speaks to the blockage that a lot of people have, that these important questions of what kind of what kind of person we should be, what kind of virtues we should embody, um, those questions are fine until we put them into context of our own life. Like that's like, I mean, I don't mean to like put words, thoughts in your mind or anything, but it's like maybe people aren't even considering these virtues because they don't apply to them. They can't apply to them.
I, I,
You know what I'm saying?
yes. I mean, I don't look at things in terms of virtues, and to begin with,
Yeah.
I think it has to be practical. It has to be practical to people's
Okay.
actual lives if you want to engage them seriously.
Okay.
And that's I don't think I don't I think you and I look at things a little bit differently, because I think
Indeed.
you want to save the world by helping people think better and be more virtuous and sort of improve themselves.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure that's possible
Mm.
And I think philosophy, I think it's a valuable thing in that way, and it could be possible to do that, to help people in that way. But um, I think that people are basically virtuous in their own way.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that we need to increase people's virtue is not the issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you touched on it before, but I think the philosophy helps people understand issues, understand things better. So maybe they're more, empathetic or sympathetic or open-minded or less likely to be bamboozled, less likely to be conned in some ways. And if people are less likely to be conned, then they're more able to act on their basic decency.
Okay.
And I think people are being conned to be indecent. And right now, we have this thing with the masks and wearing the masks in the pandemic, and people refusing to wear the masks.
Mm-hmm.
And they're being conned to be indecent because
Mm-hmm.
people are not indecent. Most
Mm-hmm.
people are not indecent.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, basically they're not, but they're conned into being that because the people have a benefit by conning them. They get
Mm-hmm.
political advantage, they get political power.
Mm-hmm.
Even racism, a lot of it is people pushing racist ideas for their own political power and then conning people to be indecent
Mm-hmm.
when and you have generations of this going on, so it's hard to fix it. It's hard to
Right. There's a
to
lot.
there's a lot there, right? You can't just turn a switch,
Yeah.
but people have an incentive to push racism. People have an incentive to push divisiveness. People have an incentive to convince people not to wear masks because it
Mm-hmm.
increases their political power
Mm-hmm.
or their control or their wealth or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can help people think critically, like you're saying,
Mm-hmm.
then maybe they're less likely to be conned. But I think that people don't even know they're being indecent because the con is
Yeah.
so good. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. No, I like that. I mean, this is why you're one of the white guys I know, because I appreciate you disagreeing kind of with something that is at my core, because it is something that I keep having to come around to as far as like why do I think this is going to work,
Right.
whatever that means. And I think that I agree with your disagreement. I think you're absolutely right, and I think that's something that I'm going to chew on. As for the rest of the day, and then as I go over this episode, is how deep is this con and what kind of cons are there, and what that means. I mean, frankly, fuck. Yeah, that
Well, I
makes
mean,
a lot of sense, and
I'm
it's
a
so
cynic,
disturbing.
right? Since I was a
That's what I've
teenager,
been
right?
wanting to ask. Like, so
Okay.
what? You're not irrational. You're not a virtue ethicist. Where do you
But I
fall? You're the
actually,
cynic.
I'm, but I'm a cynic, but I actually do believe people are basically decent, most of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just yeah,
Most people are kind to their families, right?
yeah,
Most people are kind to people in their community. Most people
right,
are generally.
right,
And then they're sort of conned into the worst parts. I mean, I think
right.
racism is the biggest example of a con where people are
Yeah,
being, and it's generations. It's not like some easy thing to fix,
yeah,
but they've been conned into this their whole life
yeah,
and their parents' lives. And it can be from their religion too, right?
right,
And it can be, ethnicism, whatever you call it, against other religions, whatever it is. You know, they're brought up this way,
right.
and they're brought up this way because the people who are pushing this have a get a benefit out of it, and that's the cynicism. Okay,
Yeah,
is if you want to keep your power, you've got to push the other guy down. You got to deprive him of his rights, whatever it is, or make yourself feel better by hating somebody else, right?
mm-hmm,
Okay,
mm-hmm,
so that's where the cynicism does come in. And I spent a lot of time on this Shakespeare stuff, okay?
Hmm.
I spent a lot of time dealing with the Shakespeare stuff. And it's my basic research, and it's also viewing how the arguments go and what's going on. And let me tell you, it creates an incredible amount of cynicism. Not that I
Mm.
didn't have it already, but my estimation of people
Yeah.
and what they're willing to defend, and the kind of arguments that they're willing to abide by, because it helps their position or keeps their power or whatever it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
And it doesn't create a great deal of uh, faith in humanity.
No.
But like I said, I do think that people are not as bad as we fear.
Okay.
I think that people are not as bad as one might fear, but I think they're easier to con than people realize. And so I think that if you can explode the con, and philosophy can help with
Hmm.
that,
Hmm.
that can help. I
That
believe
might
that.
be that might be the quote that I use for you for
Okay,
this
something like
episode.
this,
That's
something
yeah, that's
like
pretty
this.
good.
But I've been a
So
cynic and a negative guy since I was a teenager, probably since I was a child. I mean, this is not new.
yeah.
I've and nothing in life has changed my view of anything, but um, that's the way it goes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, we're all just people. That's the one thing we're just people, right?
Yeah.
Having kids is something that people do. And part of the thing that philosophers get people away from understanding is that we need to talk about what actually is going on. And it's what Hume calls the is ought problem, right?
Mm.
Is philosophy talking about what is, or what talking about what ought to be?
Mm.
And for me, it's more about talking about what is and trying to understand it. And then each of us can figure out what we want to do. And that's great. But
Mm.
first, you have to understand what is. And like you were talking about sociology, philosophy and sociology aren't that different and shouldn't be that different, because
Right.
studying people and how they are, and psychology, and Hume was a psychologist, right?
Mm.
Basically, he was a psychologist, and in our modern terminology, a philosopher and a psychologist. So
Hmm.
studying the is important, and people do have families, and it is important to them. That's
Hmm.
what I wanted to say about families. And as far as you, I want to talk about your risk taking and
Okay.
what that means for you philosophically, in
Mm.
terms of your physicality, and how your practice. You have a sort of a practice, right?
Hmm.
I don't know if it's religious for you or philosophical, or and how that interacts with sort of your views of other people and yourself and stuff. I
Hmm.
want to have some, even if you don't put this in your video, I want to know a little bit about that, because I think it's really quite interesting, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what is that for you? Do you feel yourself
Yeah.
as a risk taker physically? Do you?
The more, especially, so I've been doing pole for about 7 years now.
Right,
I never felt like much of a risk taker when I was just dancing.
right,
Even
right.
though, like, there's choreography that we
Injuries,
did like
right,
on pool tables, and yeah, I mean, being a dancer, something always
right,
hurts.
right.
And there's, balancing on people. Like, I did a mild level of that kind of stuff. But with pole, and this is something that you learn very, very quickly as a beginner, it hurts. It is physical
Oh,
pain.
oh,
You get calluses, your muscles
right,
hurt, you find new muscles, there's skin that has to be conditioned. You have to wear, literally peel away skin so
wow,
that new skin can grow back
right.
tougher so that you can do stuff. Um, and every part of the body gets used at some point. It's a joke that I tell, especially like parties, when I get to teach pole parties. It's like, yeah,
Right.
I've got a great body, and most of us pole dancers wear really skimpy stuff, but that's for safety. because I'm going to be holding on with
right,
like
right,
my butt cheek, you know?
right, 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 right,
Like
right.
I'm not trying to show off my ass. I'm just trying
Well,
to like
you
not
are
fall.
trying to show off a little bit, but
Right. Right. Yeah. So there is that. But the risk taking, especially the last 3 years, because I've been actually competing
right.
professionally. Like I won a competition and that's how I got my pro card.
Okay.
And I make money, I make some money doing this art.
Do it really?
So I'm a professional. Yeah.
Okay, okay. So I know a
The,
professional pole dancer. That's very
yeah.
cool.
And the studio where I teach in Las Vegas is owned by Cirque du Soleil artists. And
Oh, wow.
so, I am on the roster with other people who are Cirque du Soleil performers. So
Right,
it's
right,
it's kind of a big deal. So that risk taking has definitely come in the last 3 years. That with taller poles, with harder tricks, with yeah, I mean the
right,
standard
right.
pole in our studio, those are 13 and a half feet tall. My
Okay.
pole that I have in my backyard is just under 10 feet.
Oh,
So if I'm working with anything under 13 feet, I don't think it's that bad.
right,
But
right,
I do still realize, once I get up there, once I get up to 10 feet or whatever, oh, if I don't do something right, I could die. I could seriously hurt myself. I
right,
am aware of that.
right, right,
Where philosophy has come in, it's been a couple of things. One is that mind body stuff. Like I kind of hated it before when I was learning it
right.
in school. I was like, this is such bullshit. These philosopher dudes think that they can separate their minds from their bodies and that that's something that's important. And like, they don't know what it's like to have a uterus and they don't know what it's like to do this. And I just thought it was just like the stupidest thing to like create an entire like philosophical world about, until I started doing pole. And then when I started teaching pole, and I have to really be like, this is hurting me, but it's not going to kill me. So I need to focus on
Oh,
something else.
right, right, right,
Or if I start thinking about things that are going on outside in my life, if I start thinking about my day job, my stresses that I have, like how much money am I going to be able to pay my bills? If I start focusing on any of that, I'm going to fall. I will
right, right.
literally fall. And so it is a like such a like singular amount of like singular focus has to happen um in the moment. And when I'm trying to convince myself or work through problems, I do get back to that. Well, that's just my physical body. Let me think rationally about what my physical body needs in order to make this possible. And now let me get my brain on board, my mind on board with this. That yeah, that's been a huge thing for me. Um, I mean, physical pain is ripping skin on metal
Right, right. I
on
can't imagine.
purpose.
Have you had injuries like
Yeah. Um, so, I mean, I don't go to the doctor much because of healthcare needs, but I'm pretty sure after one competition, I bruised a rib. I haven't broken anything.
right?
I did strain my thumb when I was spotting a student one day. My thumb just went back too far.
Oh, wow.
And so that got all discolored. Like I've said, I've torn off a lot of skin, busted open blisters or
Right.
calluses. My toe was out of place for a little while because of a handstand for the better part of 2 years ago. And then it popped into place after like 6 months or something.
Oh, wow.
So there's like little stuff like that.
Right, right.
I haven't broken anything, knock on wood. We have students who have um, either being on their apparatus or like something related to it. But safety is huge, just
Right.
depending on what the apparatus is, whether we're putting down mats or just like knowing points of contact, how many things are holding on to the apparatus. So pole especially, that's a huge thing when I'm teaching. It's like, no, you're safe if you don't let go with your hands. Just keep
Right,
holding on.
right, 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 right. I can't imagine. I
Yeah.
mean, I would be so nervous just watching these. I'm nervous watching you. And this is sort of, sort of like the neurotic scale or whatever. I mean, I literally get nervous I love watching your videos because you're so artistic, but I get nervous, right?
Yeah.
And I think that would make me so crazy. I mean, I'd be so worried about these people. And
Yeah.
as talking about parenting, as a father, I've always been, limited the risks my kids take.
Mm.
I have not. They were not risk takers to begin with because they're my children, right? Sort of you
Right.
pick up stuff from your parents.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I started pole. My mom actually gave me a Groupon to take pole classes when I was like just before I turned 30.
Oh
And
wow. So it's
it's
your
one of those
mom's
things.
fault, right?
It is her fault. Yeah. Yeah. But it's one of those things where like people who are adults who either have a gymnastics or dance or whatever other like high level physical background,
Right.
we get to be, in our 30s, and it's like, well, what am I supposed to do with this like passion for physical activity? And pole is really, really good for it because there's so many different things. Well, any of the circus arts, aerial arts, because it's just fun. I mean,
Right.
flying through the air is pretty amazing.
Right.
And it's a new challenge. I mean, gosh, like figuring out how to hold on by like my knee and my foot all while I'm spinning, like fighting centrifugal forces. Like,
But it sort of transformed your body too, right? I mean,
yeah,
so you sort of
that's
like almost like metamorphosed yourself
yeah.
through this practice, right?
Which
I
I
mean,
like
I
hadn't even
guess, right?
noticed for a while. Yeah, because it's like again, I've always been doing something physical, but in the last few years
Right, right,
especially, I'm like, oh no, things have changed. I've definitely like toned up. I
right.
have way more body awareness than I used to.
Right, right.
I mean, hell, I watch videos of myself sometimes that don't believe that I did the things.
Right, right. Well, it's I mean, it's not I mean, it's way out there in terms of I mean, you got to put in a clip. I mean, people need to see this, but people I don't know if people are going to hear this, but anyway, one needs to actually see it to believe it what you're actually doing. And you're middle of nowhere in Arizona doing it sometimes or you take
Yeah,
your pole to these destinations. That's what I really loved when you would take
yeah,
the pole somewhere crazy. And
yeah,
it's
yeah. I'd
like
love to do that more.
it's a surreal thing because it doesn't seem real. How could somebody do that? And for me, is how somebody would do something so scary. I mean, it's not just the physicality of it; it's just like the daring of it. And then
And
it's sort of like it's sort of like almost like a dream type thing, right?
yeah, and the unbelievability of it. Honestly, I think that's kind of what keeps us going back to it. We
Right,
all
right.
kind of admit that we're a little crazy for doing the stuff that we do. Like the studio where I work now in Las Vegas. It's the new space, and those ceilings are 25 feet high.
Um,
So, I don't even go up that high. Like, I
right, right,
can't with my pole. Like, so there's people who do crazier stuff.
right,
But how do I say this? It's a reason that I love teaching, whether it's philosophy or pole, is getting to see people do things that they didn't think they could do.
right, right,
And pole, especially, these women, these men, these children come in and they think, nope, I can't do that. They see me demonstrate something and they're like, that's why no.
right,
Hard no. And then they figure it out. There are steps to do it. We go through the steps and then they do it, and it's just this like, wow, that's me
right, right.
doing it,
And
because
you
it's amazing.
and I would imagine it's a lot more satisfying than teaching philosophy because
It
there's
is.
such a, you know what I mean? I mean,
It totally
not to
is.
knock philosophy teachers because
No, it is.
some of my favorite people are philosophy professors, but
Yeah.
there's you can see people you're teaching somebody how to do something and they actually do it. You're like, wow,
Right.
you know.
Yeah. And then, I mean, that was the reason that I got out of philosophy. That's the reason that I didn't go on to PhD. I mean, yeah, I didn't get into the one school that I really wanted, but really, I didn't want to spend another 7 or however many years not actually acting in the world.
Right, right. Well, it's a
Um,
very strange. The PhD thing is a very strange world.
yeah, yeah,
Um, as I've
yeah.
learned in the, I was never seriously considering that.
Mm,
And with the Shakespeare stuff, I do see inside academia way more than I want,
mm.
and it's a mess. I mean, it's a mess. But you know, I do think that people are who are drawn to that.
Mhm,
I'm glad they have the opportunity. You know,
mhm.
if you're so passionate about this stuff that you want to be engaged with it every day for years, for more years. I mean, we were engaged for about 2 years or whatever, the
Yeah,
program was.
yeah.
And sort of, I was satisfied. I was satisfied. I got
Mhm,
the things I wanted to study, I did, and I was satisfied. And I don't read philosophy books, much. I
mhm,
don't think, I mean, I think about it normally, but for me, it was like an itch and I scratched it and I was
mhm,
happy with that. And it
mhm.
took me forever to finish my thesis. It took me years and years. Like
Uh.
I went to the absolute limit of 7 years. And
Oh God.
every semester that the my advisor would email me, you make any progress? I said, not yet. I'll talk to you next semester. And I had a lot of stuff going on with the family and all, but I was
Yeah,
procrastinating because at that point I didn't care. I was already
yeah,
satisfied, right?
yeah,
And it was just to getting the credential. I mean, I eventually did do it, but it was just sort of the credential. But I had satisfied my itch,
yeah,
right? Now, my
yeah.
real
There's.
problem with the Shakespeare stuff is I've satisfied my itch, but my ego won't let me stop.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean?
I
So,
got I got a little taste of that when you said, these people, they're critical of what I have to say, but it doesn't matter because I'm right and they're wrong.
well, the thing is, it's different from philosophy. That's the thing. Philosophy is like, well, my ethical system is better than yours.
Yeah.
Or linguistics, my syntactic representation is more correct than yours. It's different from. I'm saying something different here. I'm saying this
Hmm.
guy wrote these plays. Okay,
Yeah.
either he
Yeah.
did or he didn't. It's a factual question. Okay,
Yeah.
so I'm dealing with something real. Now
Yeah.
it could be that it's completely in my head, that I'm
Hmm.
completely wrong, but
Hmm.
at least it's an empirical question as
Right.
opposed to arguing in circles about philosophy or
Yeah.
arguing in circles about linguistics or something,
Hmm.
where you're just looking at two sides of a different coin. And a lot of Shakespeare people try to turn it into philosophy or literary theory.
Mm.
And my point is no,
It's not
this
that.
is a
It's just an empirical question.
empirical, factual question. And maybe we can't resolve it, but I'm going to do my best. And
Yeah.
if I'm wrong, either I'm right or I'm wrong. And if I'm
Hmm.
wrong, well, then I'm wasted a lot of time, didn't I? But
Yeah.
that's okay too. I mean, so it's a different. I've never been involved in anything like this,
Mm.
where there's a fact of the matter, and I use my philosophical arguments and sort of arsenal to sort of try to understand what's going on and try to attack my own view to, to see if I'm wrong. And
Yeah.
I do that aggressively. People don't believe this. They're like,
Mm.
"Oh, you're just confirmation bias. Oh, you're just, want to argue with people." But I mean, nobody believes me. But I really do try to look at it, and I don't want to waste my time if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm wrong, but I'm not. I'm not. If I wouldn't be, what I want to tell people is, I wouldn't be wasting so much time if I was wrong. What do you think I am, an idiot?
Right.
And
Right.
nobody, they'll say, well, of course, everybody thinks that. Well, fine. Everybody thinks that, but they are idiots and I'm not. So, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
nobody's going to
I love
believe
it.
that, right? I mean,
Right. Right.
nobody's going to believe that. It's not a polite way to say it.
Yeah.
But that's my view.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be wasting my time if I was wrong.
Yeah.
Anyway, I got to go deal with my family. Nice to
Okay.
talk to you.
Very nice talking with you,
If the
Ken.
pandemic's over and you're in California, come say hi, right?
My brother lives out there now. I've
Okay,
still got
so
friends in the Bay, so I need
you
to.
can. Okay, all right.
Sounds good. Have a great day,
Talk
man.
to you later. All right, bye bye.
Bye.